Hey, welcome to another Saturday Conundrum. This is Brian from the Daily AI Show, and I host this quick Saturday podcast that's a pretty big departure from our weekly show. So if this is your first time here because this topic seemed to interest you, welcome. But just know that myself, as well as all the other co-hosts for the Daily AI Show, do a live show Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. where we cover all sorts of different AI topics. We've now almost done 500 episodes, so I encourage you to check out those episodes as well. Now, on Saturday, what I like to do is a three-part process that's sort of fun for me. I start with ChatGPT and I really work to try to figure out an AI conundrum, something that doesn't necessarily have an easy answer to. It can be debated on both sides. Once I get through that process, I use Perplexity in order to do deeper research and debate both sides. And then I take that research, if I'm happy with it, and give it to Google Notebook LM, where I do a little bit more editing. And eventually what follows me, which is two AI co-hosts who are going to talk about this topic for about 12, 13 minutes or so. It's kind of fun for me. It's a different departure from our regular show, but I always really enjoy doing it. So I want to read this intro to the conundrum in order to set us up, and then we will get into it. So AI is quickly moving past simple art reproduction. In the coming years, it'll be able to reconstruct destroyed murals, restore ancient sculptures, and even generate convincing new works in the style of long-lost masters. These reconstructions will not just be based on guesswork, but on deep analysis of archives, photos, data, and creative pattern recognition that is hard for any human team to match. Communities whose heritage was erased or stolen will have a chance to, quote, recover artifacts or artworks they never physically had, but could plausibly claim. Museums will display lost treasures rebuilt in rich detail, bridging myth and history. There may even be versions of heritage that fill in missing chapters with AI generated possibilities, giving families, artists, and nations a way to shape the past as well as the future. But when the boundary between authentic recovery and creative invention gets blurry, what happens to the idea of truth and cultural memory? If AI lets us repair old wounds by inventing what might have been, does that empower those who lost their history? Or risk building a world where memory, legacy, and even identity are open to endless revision? So here's the actual conundrum. In the near future, AI lets us restore or even invent lost cultural treasures, giving every community a richer version of its own story. As are we finally addressing old injustices or quietly creating a world where the line between real and imagined is impossible to hold? When does healing history cross into rewriting it, and who decides what belongs in the record? With that, we're going to jump over to our two AI co-hosts for a great discussion on this. This is a really fun one, guys. Hope you enjoy it.
Imagine you're looking at a stunning piece of history, maybe an ancient fresco or a sculpture, but it's just fragments. Or even worse, it was destroyed centuries ago, completely lost.
Gone forever, you think?
Exactly. But what if technology could step in and, well, bring it back? Not just, patch it up, but actually reconstruct what was lost.
It's a really powerful idea, isn't it? Almost sounds like science fiction resurrecting cultural heritage we thought was truly gone.
Absolutely. And that's precisely the fascinating and really complex space we're exploring in this depth dive today. We've looked at some incredible source material focusing on artificial intelligence, AI, and its growing role in cultural heritage restoration.
Mm-hmm. And these sources, they really get into AI's potential for, rebuilding lost artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
But they also raise some pretty significant and sometimes, let's say, uncomfortable questions.
Right. So our mission today, and we're sticking strictly to the material provided here, is to try and unpack both sides of this. The huge potential benefits like restoring history, maybe empowering communities.
Healing historical wounds even, but also the really significant challenges, things like authenticity, the risk of historical revisionism, and tricky questions about who actually owns these digital reconstructions.
Because there's this thread running through all the sources, this real conundrum.
Uh-huh.
When AI starts filling in the historical blanks, is it genuinely restoring culture, or is it kind of rewriting history?
Yeah, where does healing history cross that line into, altering it? That's the core tension.
Let's dive in then.
Okay, so let's start with the promise, because the capabilities the sources outline are, frankly, revolutionary. AI isn't just about simple cleaning or basic repair anymore. We're talking about sophisticated reconstruction.
Right. The sources are describing AI being trained to analyze just massive amounts of data archives, old photos, any surviving bits and pieces to basically learn the style, the structure of lost works. So it can then reconstruct murals that were destroyed, suggest how missing pieces of ancient sculptures might have looked, even generate entirely new but really convincing works in the style of artists whose originals are just gone.
And they mention this concept, analogical generation, which sounds complex, but the idea is interesting.
Explain that a bit. Analogical generation.
Think of it like this. Instead of just copying patterns it sees, the AI learns the underlying rules that governed how the original art or artifact was made. You know, the structure, the artistic grammar, the creative constraints of that specific culture or artist.
Okay.
Then it can apply those learned rules to generate something new that actually fits those historical constraints. Plausible reconstructions of what might have been there. It's a bit like learning the rules of, say, music composition and then writing a new piece in that style, rather than just copying an existing song.
That makes sense. And the examples the sources give are pretty compelling. There's the Digital Delacroix project.
Right, funded by Eric and Wendy Schmidt.
Yeah, they used AI and computer vision, trained it on data sets to analyze Delacroix's style, his brushwork, composition, everything, the goal, to reconstruct murals he painted that were actually destroyed over 150 years ago.
Just trying to bring back art that we only knew from descriptions, really.
Amazing. Then there's the repair project. This one tackles the incredibly painstaking work of putting shattered artifacts back together.
Oh yeah, imagine like ancient pottery or frescoes just blown into thousands of tiny bits.
Nightmare.
Totally. This project uses AI, robotics, 3D scanning, machine learning, the whole toolkit to rapidly sort, analyze, and figure out how these fragments might fit. It's the kind of job that could take human teams like decades.
Decades, yeah. AI just speeds that up dramatically.
Exactly. And it's not just research projects. Big institutions are using it too.
Like the Rijksmuseum, right. They famously used AI to help figure out the missing edges of Rembrandt's The Night Watch.
And Google worked with the Belvedere Museum in Vienna using generative adversarial networks, GANs, to try and reconstruct lost paintings by Klimt.
GNs. Those are the ones where two AIs kind of compete. One makes the image, the other tries to spot if it's fake.
That's the basic idea, yeah. And that back and forth makes the generator AI get incredibly good at creating convincing images in a specific style, like Klimt's.
But okay, the sources stress this isn't just about famous European art in big museums. The potential goes way beyond that.
Oh, absolutely. The material really highlights the profound social impact this could have, especially for communities whose heritage has been tragically wiped out, stolen, destroyed,
Right.
often through things like colonization or war. AI offers them possibilities that just didn't exist before.
Yeah, this really shifts the focus. It's not just about objects, it's about people, memory. The Synthetic Memories Project is a really striking example from the sources.
It's powerful. Helping elderly people, refugees, people who've lost everything, reconstruct personal histories. The AI generates images based just on their verbal descriptions of memories.
Wow. And they talk about setting up emergency memory clinics, getting these tools out globally, especially where people lack photos, visual records of their past lives.
And think about groups whose physical artifacts are stuck in museums far away, often a legacy of colonial collecting. AI reconstruction offers a path towards what the sources call digital repatriation.
So not getting the physical object back necessarily, but creating a digital version.
Exactly. Communities could use AI, maybe based on scans of those museum objects, to create highly detailed digital versions they can interact with, learn from, reconnect with, even if the original is thousands of miles away.
The sources also suggest this could help rebalance museum narratives, the stories museums tell.
How so?
Well, communities could use AI, drawing on their own sources like oral traditions, maybe archaeological findings, living cultural practices to create reconstructions of important sites or objects. It gives them a way to present their version of history, not just the one curated by an institution.
It sort of democratizes the tools of restoration then. You don't need the massive budget of a national museum.
Precisely. And there's this compelling idea mentioned of indigenous communities, for example, using AI to reconstruct sacred sites or ceremonial objects based on elder knowledge, historical accounts, maybe fragments they still have.
It becomes a tool for reclaiming agency, control over their own story, their visual representation, a kind of digital sovereignty, maybe making sure their heritage is preserved and shared on their own terms.
So the promise is huge. Filling gaps, bringing back lost things, empowering people whose histories were suppressed.
Yeah.
But, and this is where the sources really dig in, the very power of AI to make these convincing reconstructions throws up some really deep questions about authenticity. This is the authenticity dilemma.
Yeah, this is critical. Because AI can generate stuff that looks so real, it really blurs the line. Is this restoration based strictly on evidence, filling a tiny crack? Or is it a creative interpretation, a plausible guess about something totally missing? It gets hard to tell.
For experts and for the public viewing it.
Exactly. And the sources are clear. AI's guesses aren't always right. They need checking, validation by human experts, art historians, conservators, people from the originating culture.
Plus, there's the whole issue of the data AI learns from, right? What if those data sets have built-in biases?
That's a major risk. The AI could end up just replicating or even amplifying old misconceptions or stereotypes about a culture or an art style because that's what was in the data it learned from.
Which leads to deeper worries about, well, truth and memory. The sources mention algorithmic anchoring. What's that about?
It's the idea that once an AI model latches onto a certain pattern or bias during its training, it can get kind of stuck on it. It might start inserting things that don't belong historically, anachronisms, or might resist being corrected.
So it reshapes the past based on its own internal logic, not necessarily the historical facts.
But potentially, yes. And when you combine that potential flaw with these incredibly realistic, photorealistic AI images, well, the line between historical fact and digital fantasy gets very, very blurry.
Archival truth gets challenged. A slick AI reconstruction might just feel more real or authoritative than careful, nuanced scholarly work.
Right, you risk spectacle over substance, passive consumption, instead of critical thinking about what we're actually seeing.
And this brings us to some really serious stuff around historical revisionism and cultural appropriation.
Definitely. The material cites studies suggesting that if people see biased AI images presented as history, they can actually start adopting those biases as fact, which is, particularly dangerous in sensitive political contexts or for communities dealing with trauma.
Inaccurate reconstructions could actually distort memory instead of healing it.
You could end up with fabricated histories gaining credibility just because they look so visually sophisticated.
And the cultural appropriation risk, how does AI play into that?
Well, imagine using AI to reconstruct sacred sites, objects, or even rituals, but without getting permission from the community it belongs to. The sources call this a potential form of digital colonialism.
Right, because the AI might be trained on global data sets, mixing traditions inappropriately.
Exactly. Or decontextualizing sacred knowledge, violating cultural protocols, maybe even intellectual property rights. There's a real concern that without extreme care, AI restoration could end up mirroring the same extractive practices that led to heritage loss in the first place, just digitally.
So navigating this ethical minefield is maybe the biggest challenge highlighted.
Arguably, yes, because these AI tools aren't just in labs. They allow individuals, groups outside the traditional institutions, to create and share reconstructions, which directly challenges the authority of museums, established experts.
Absolutely. So who gets to say what's a legitimate reconstruction? Is it the community's version based on oral history, the museum's based on physical fragments, the AI's based on its training data? How do you weigh these competing narratives?
Who has the authority? It's a huge question. And then there's ownership. It's incredibly thorny.
How so?
Well, if an AI is trained on scans of artifacts sitting in, say, a European museum, but those artifacts originally came from an indigenous community, who owns the rights to the digital reconstruction the AI produces?
Oh, wow, yeah. That's complex.
It forces us to grapple with really difficult legal and ethical issues, intellectual property, community rights, responsible stewardship of cultural knowledge in this digital realm.
And ultimately, who's responsible for making sure these reconstructions are culturally sensitive, accurate, especially when they might shape public understanding globally?
It's a massive responsibility. The sources strongly emphasize the need for governance, ethical frameworks. We have to balance this amazing potential for innovation with the absolute need for sensitivity and accuracy.
Transparency seems key, like being really clear about what's based on hard evidence versus what's a speculative AI generation.
Totally. But one of the core problems mentioned is that the tech is moving so fast. AI development often just outpaces our ability to create the ethical guidelines or legal structures needed.
And cultural heritage itself is international, interdisciplinary. making global rules really hard.
Yeah, the sources call for collaboration, getting communities, institutions, the AI developers, researchers all to the table. Frameworks need to cover things like consent-free, prior, and informed consent, clear standards for accuracy, ways to resolve disputes.
It sounds like a massive undertaking, creating systems flexible enough for different cultures, but also rigorous enough to prevent misuse.
It is. And the sources warn that without these kinds of robust frameworks, despite all the incredible potential, the risk of doing real harm is significant.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. Synthesizing what the sources present, the whole debate around AI and cultural restoration really seems to boil down to these deep tensions. Tensions around authority, authenticity, and agency, and how we understand and maybe reshape the past.
On one side, yeah, the material shows these unprecedented opportunities, healing historical wounds, democratizing heritage, empowering marginalized voices, bringing back lost culture in ways we couldn't imagine before.
But on the other side, there are these serious, tangled risks. The potential for historical revisionism using convincing fakes, cultural appropriation, authentic memory maybe getting eroded by biased algorithms.
And even the possibility of creating new forms of digital colonialism if we're not careful.
It brings us right back to that core question, that conundrum raised in the sources. When does using AI to heal history cross the line into rewriting it?
And who gets to decide? Who decides what version of the past gets reconstructed, gets brought back into the light, and what actually belongs in the historical record?
It's a question AI forces us to confront right now, but like you said earlier, it echoes through history, doesn't it?
It really does.
And it leaves you, the listener, with a really challenging thought. Building on this idea of AI filling in missing chapters, giving plausible reconstructions, if AI can potentially offer every community a richer, maybe fuller version of its own story, possibly by, well, inventing what might have been, what does that actually do to our collective relationship with the verifiable past? With the facts we can actually prove.
And how does that influence the shared future we're trying to build?
Exactly. Definitely something to keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.